Hello and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name's Angel Baby Kaya. Make sure you like, subscribe, follow me on all of my socials. Make sure to read the full Substack on this topic. But today we're talking about the gentrification of thrifting. This is a little hot take of mine. I haven't done one for a while, but I think I've made this video before, but it didn't really get a lot of views. So here I am with my gorgeous matcha talking about gentrification of thrifting. This is something that I've been thinking about lately, just seeing a bunch of thrifting hauls and stuff and just kind of laughing at how the pendulum swings. We're just gonna get started. So, thrifting used to be something people made fun of you for. If your clothes were from Goodwill or any other charity shops, you were poor, dirty, or couldn't afford real clothes. Now, thrifting is this whole aesthetic, a side hustle, a business model even. It's a full-time job for resellers, and somehow thrift store prices are starting to look exactly like mall prices, which kind of like defeats the whole point of going thrifting. How did we go from only poor people go to the thrift and shop there to this is my curated vintage resale brand? That's what we're going to unpack today. I've always loved secondhand clothing. It was kind of my only option growing up as well because my mom would take us clothing shopping like once before school started and that was it. So if I wanted anything else, I would have to go to the Goodwill or a charity store, thrift store, whatever. Thrifting was the mix of necessity and creativity for me. It let me pick out clothes that I actually wanted because I paid it with my own money, whether it's from chores or from holidays or birthdays or whatever. It's like, yeah, we're saving money, or at least we were when we were buying from Goodwill, but there's always like really cool, unique finds. At least there used to be. I've watched thrifting transform into this weird kind of monster in real time. It was like something that people bullied me for in school when I was in middle school, and then somehow rebranded into this like it girl business. I know that every person that's into fashion has a depop. It's an actual industry that a lot of people depend on for income. Like, it's crazy that there's so many full-time resellers actually doing this. I have had my encounters with depop boys at the Goodwill bins, and it's absolutely fucking atrocious. Like, it's really, really weird how they act with these things, and they will cut your arm off. And with all of that said, there is a lot of tension between the classes, gatekeeping, and just straight up gentrification that doesn't get talked about enough. So we're gonna start with the basics, being that thrift stores weren't invented for TikTok hauls. There was a time before we had all of this social media and digital media consumption. American thrift stores started showing up in the late 1800s, early 1900s era, where there was a lot of foreign immigrant families that were moving to US cities. There were like church, charities, thrift shops, and they saw all this poverty and all this stuff and basically went, okay, if we take rich people's old clothes and sell them cheap to, keep our programs running to fund the church. According to the Salvation Army's own history, they were running what they called a salvage brigade by the 1890s, literally pushing carts around asking for used clothes, then reselling them to support shelters and help the immigrant communities. And Goodwill would start in Boston in 1902, and their founder would go to wealthy neighborhoods, collect used clothes and household goods, and hire poor and disabled people to repair them, and then sell them at low prices. Their whole motto was basically a hand up, not a hand out. And I feel like Goodwill still tends to hire, like, if you have like a criminal history, or if you're on like government programs at CalWorks and stuff like that, I think they tend to gravitate towards those people that help them out to get a job. We'll get into Goodwill later. So from the beginning, thrift stores are charity infrastructure. They exist because rich people have excess and poor people have nothing, and they're built for people who can't afford new clothes, period. I did work at Buffalo Exchange for like a day, and it was really weird, like, not to go off on a tangent, but it was really weird. Their mentality is low-key kind of cult-like, but I learned from having to read the employee handbook that the owner of Buffalo Exchange, I think they opened it like in Texas or Arizona or something, and they basically expanded. It was one of the first like thrift vintage reseller stores that like was curated, I believe. I try to block it all out because they're absolutely insane, and that's another video in itself, but we're gonna move on. For a long time, wearing secondhand was a visible signal that you didn't have money and you were poor and you're probably like low income. According to Time magazine, the history of thrift stores talks about how used clothes were seen as unsanitary and low status, a sign that you couldn't afford new things. There's even prejudice toward the people selling them, like Jewish immigrants running secondhand push carts in cities, and that bias just rubbed off on the clothes itself. An article from Fast at UCLA points out that in 1800s, people literally thought secondhand fabric could spread disease, which made clothes feel dirty in a very literal way. I know there's things like MRSA that can be spread, but like wash your clothes, when you get it from the thrift store. I know some people that wash their clothes from the thrift store. I feel like for me personally, if I'm being super honest, I wash my clothes from thrift stores when I feel like it's just like icky, like if it's like pants or something. Clothing swaps, I do a lot of clothing swaps, and something that these people bring in smell kind of funky. So I try to wash them if I do keep them for the next clothing swap, just to be like hygienic. Literally, you could just wash these clothes. So secondhand shops got called junk shops, and as a new department stores and malls came up, buying new became this big status symbol. So you have like establishment of using a credit card, this kind of economic boom of buying things. You have Tupperware parties, have your Avon representatives, a bunch of just consumerist capitalist things that people like to pride themselves on having new things. And that's why a lot of our parents and grandparents still equate thrifting with failure. If you were finally able to afford new clothes, going back to second hand felt like sliding backward in life. And I feel like someone who had their great grandmother and she lived through the Great Depression, she would save literally everything, and she would take so much care of her clothes. Like I literally have a fur coat from her. She kept in like just pristine condition, and just a lot of her clothes were just kept very neatly, very well taken care of. And I feel like it's because of this mentality, like, oh, you have new clothes, you really need to take care of them, versus having secondhand clothes where they're already worn, and like, what are you gonna do, which I think you should just take care of your clothes in general for like the longevity. Now we're gonna get into the counterculture kids and the cool phase. So when you start to see thrift stores get reclaimed by people who actually want to look different, think of like the punk kids, grunge hippies, alt kids pulling oversized suits, slip dresses, old band tees, DIYing stuff they found from the thrift store, leather jackets out of bins. They're not shopping secondhand because they have no other option. They're doing it to say, I don't look like the catalog. I don't need to go to the mall to have cool clothes, and I don't want to be part of the establishment. It's very anti-consumerism, anti-consumer. So thrifting became this very anti-mainstream, anti-system establishment, and it was a movement for certain subcultures and became an integral part of what they believe in. Sociologists talk about this as using secondhand style as kind of a cultural capital, proving you have taste, not money. This is still very niche, and mainstream culture still sees secondhand as embarrassing. So at this point, we've got poor and working class families thrifting out of necessity, and subculture kids thrifting as rebellion. Same store, same racks, completely different meaning depending on who's walking in the store. Let's fast forward to the 2000s and 2010s. This is where we have recession, fast fashion boom, and then the inevitable sustainable rebrand. Fast fashion blows up. Forever 21, H&M, Zara, Shein, all of these fast fashion giants, all making it insanely cheap to buy new clothes constantly. All the Shein hauls, what you gonna wear this week, what's coming in this week, what did I get in the mail. At the same time, we're overproducing like crazy, and a lot of those clothes end up in donation bins, landfills, or both. You ever see it on TikTok where people go to Goodwill and said like, oh, someone was an art hoe, because there's really specific pieces to the art hoe movement and people get over the trend. Or like C-punk or Tumblr. I feel like Tumblr is probably less niche than C-punk, but you can go to Goodwill and you can probably spot out some pieces from that era. Then the 2008 financial crisis hit, and Time points out after the crash there was a noticeable uptick of in for-profit thrift and resale as cash-strapped people looked for cheaper fashion options. Thrifting starts to look smart again, not just desperate. Meanwhile, people start paying more attention to fashion's environmental impact. People are starting to realize that we are over-consuming a lot, becoming more aware of like our carbon footprint and all of those environmental pillars. Articles and studies talk about textile waste, carbon emissions, basically how the textile industry is pretty much detrimental to our earth and our climate change. Secondhand gets rebranded as part of the solution, a way to slow down the fashion cycle by keeping clothes in use longer. So suddenly, the thing isn't labeled as you're just poor. It's suddenly you're sustainable, you're ethical, you're conscious. This kind of leans towards like, oh, you're like liberal in the sense of like you care about the environment. And it's like literally the same thing that's been happening for years since the 1800s. Same act, buying used clothes, but it now signals something completely different depending on the era and who's doing it, okay? Now we see these it girl influencers, which kind of ties into my last video, physical media and hot girls, of, oh, because this certain kind of person is thrifting and saying that it's good for an environment, now it's cool. Forget about the other subcultures that were taking part of it. It became mainstream, so therefore it's cool. And social media walks in and basically blows everything up because now we're having non-stop consumption of potential possibilities of what you could get at the thrift store. For example, like finding Prada at the thrift store instead of buying new Prada. Now people are starting to treat it like couponing, I guess I would compare it to that, where like try to find the best finds in the thrift store. You get YouTube thrift hauls, Tumblr vintage aesthetics, Instagram to Goodwill with me reels, TikToks about flipping my $3 find into $60 on Depop. Now the platforms like Depop, I have to mention Poshmark, ThredUp, Grailed, Vintage, turned thrifting into a full-on business model. A paper on digital resale platforms literally talks about how online resale is now a major piece of the fashion economy, with secondhand growing faster than traditional retail. In the fashion economy, thrifting is now considered something substantially important, leveled up next to these big fashion houses, also fast fashion retailers, which comes a loop because ultimately even the high-end stuff will be circled into a charity shop, into a curated store like Crossroads or Buffalo Exchange, Second Street. They're things that cater mostly to the high end. You have places like Goodwill, Salvation Army, Goodwill Bin, Savers that you really have to look through it. So there's like curated shops and then non-curated shops, which are still slightly curated but most likely overpriced. And now a lot of people aren't thrifting for themselves, they're thrifting for inventory. This is sourcing. This is finding things that you could use for wholesale in your Depop shop. The thrift store becomes the wholesale supplier for your curated Y2K, Coquette, Grunge Fairy, whatever core shop that you have. To be fair, some people are doing this thoughtfully, but we will also see the other side of people buying out racks of plus size clothes to resell online or to thrift flip. $2 basic hoodies turn into $45 vintage Y2K pieces. Depop girlies have gone insane sometimes, like literally buying a children's t-shirt, a child's t-shirt, and saying Y2K baby tee. Now there's even a study on thrift resellers in low income communities that found resellers can negatively impact locals by overbuying and driving up prices, leaving fewer affordable options on the racks. The same stores that were built as a safety net are now a product pipeline for people with Wi-Fi and a label printer. So this is where the word gentrification really fits. And I know a lot of people use the word gentrification not sparingly, but I feel like this is kind of essentially what gentrification is. Several writers talk about this idea of the gentrification of thrifting, that as middle and upper class shoppers adopt thrifting as a trend or a side hustle, prices go up and original communities get pushed out. Most of the time when people talk about gentrification in LA, they're usually talking about like neighborhoods or properties. I live in Koreatown and I can see the gentrification happening around me. And my own apartment building is gonna get gentrified because they just got bought out by these new property managers or landlords. And you can see that these new apartments popping up in Westlake in near MacArthur Park. Brand new apartments. Then you have all the homeless people on the streets shooting up, doing whatever they do at MacArthur Park. And it's just like, if they build these apartments, then these people who are the vendors on the streets are just trying to get their daily lives through, taking their kids to school, using public transportation, doing things that they need to do to earn money and pay for their rent, which a lot of people do rely on government assistance. And I feel like it feels like it purposely drives out those people because these apartments are so expensive. You have to make like what, 2 even 3 times the rent to be able to afford a 1 bedroom apartment, even in a place like MacArthur Park. And I think like it has a lot to do with systemic racism, and I know people are gonna roll their eyes into this, but I personally feel like there's so much history into Los Angeles and how they kind of made these certain communities. Like Beverly Hills wasn't always for rich people. Before, the poor people would live in the hills, and then now it's opposite. So it's just kind of like this weird system that we have, like socially and class wise, of like, well, in certain areas or in certain groups. And I think that's like how gentrification is very harmful to people who are already low income and trying to not be displaced by these newly built apartment buildings. So back to thrifting. How this is gentrification of thrifting is because pieces that used to be a couple dollars are selling $15 or $20. I don't think anything at Goodwill should be above $20. I know you have to count for inflation, but honestly, seeing all this stuff, like even Shein at Goodwill being above $10 is really insane because it's probably not even that much on their website, and you might as well just buy it new. Especially in neighborhoods that get a lot of resellers and influencers. So like I said, I live in LA, and I went to the Goodwill yesterday at Melrose and Fairfax. I think it's on Beverly. I'm just like, these prices are absolutely insane. I stopped going to the Goodwill bins because at this point it's just like I don't like the environment, and it's just very like not even catty, like beyond catty. And it's mostly with the guys that I've experienced this with. Local articles and studies point out that thrift stores are raising prices as demand increases, even though the inventory is still donated. And I have a lot of people that are close with me that are resellers. I have also been a reseller myself during the pandemic, so it's not like I'm necessarily bashing on resellers. I'm just saying that we should recognize that this reseller economy that we've created also does have a downside to it, and to blindly just defend it and say like, no, this doesn't happen, doesn't help the situation. It doesn't make you look any better. And again, we're not talking about some little vintage boutique that's always been pricey. We're talking about the last affordable option for a lot of these low income families quietly becoming not that affordable. So you may end up with this tension: thrifting as survival, thrifting as subculture, thrifting as sustainability flex, or thrifting as a business model, all happening in the same space on the same racks, but not affecting everyone equally. So where does this leave us? I'm not here to say that if you're not poor, you can never set foot in a thrift store. I love going thrifting, but I literally go thrifting like once every 2 months just because it's expensive. It's really expensive to go thrifting, and it's just like, should I just buy something new? But I also don't want to contribute to, consuming fast fashion as well. It's unrealistic, and it's honestly not the point. Secondhand should be normalized. It shouldn't be looked down upon. It's better than pumping more money into ultra fast fashion or these big corporations. And Goodwill has a lot of really shady things about it, which I can get into another video about the shady things of Goodwill. And I'm not saying that they're any better for these corporations, because Goodwill is a corporation. I feel like it's better than the slave labor that is being, used for these fast fashion retailers. And then it comes into the question, if these fast fashion retailers didn't employ the people making the clothes wouldn't have jobs. It comes into that moral question too. What I am saying is we need to hold two truths at once. Thrifting has been a survival tool for poor and working class communities for over a century. The current trendiness and reselling boom really does impact these communities when it drives prices up or strips racks of basics. I feel like everyone deserves to have clothing that makes them feel good. And I feel like that's just a basic necessity is clothing. It'd be right under food and water and shelter. And that's just my opinion. If you're reselling, that doesn't automatically make you evil, but you can be mindful of what you're trying to buy in bulk, especially plus sizes and basics. I do feel like if you're doing plus sizes and you're reflipping them, but in the same plus size it came in instead of making them to like a vanity sizing. I feel like that's pretty cool because a lot of plus size people often have to buy fast fashion because they can't find anything cute in the thrift stores. Sourced from buy, sell, trade, estate sales, flea markets, not just clearing out every Goodwill in a 20-mile radius. I remember when I was reselling and I got to a Savers here in Pasadena. It was 11 in the morning. It just opened, maybe at like 10, and the racks were absolutely cleared. And I was like, what the hell? I saw this one guy with 2 carts full of like clothes, and he was wearing his baggy jeans, baggy shirt, beanie, and nose piercing. And I was like, he's a depop. They just have a look. Pop sellers just have a look. Like, you know someone, you know when you see them, okay? Remember that not everything you touch needs to be turned into a drop or a collection. If you're just searching for yourself, it's worth remembering the history. This isn't just a quirky aesthetic. There's a whole story of charity, stigma, survival, and now gentrification behind every $3 tag. Well, probably not $3 anymore. So yeah, thrifting went from survival to subculture to sustainability flex to a business model. And I really want to know your guys' thoughts on this. Do you think resellers are helping keep clothes out of landfill and in circulation, or are they pricing out the last affordable option they had? Let me know in the comments, especially if you grew up thrifting out of necessity. I see you. I want to hear your experience. I'm Kyra, and this is my hot take for this week. If you want a deeper dive with citations and all the nerdy details, I will be doing a full write-up on my Substack that is linked below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and send this to the friend who calls everything vintage, even when it's from 2010. Alright, I'll see you guys next time. Bye!